Yeah, so welfare reform has to be remembered that it was Trent Lott, who was a Republican leader at the time, he called it the holy grail of the GOP's legislative agenda at the time. So, it was one of these holdovers of the kind of liberal era of US politics, and obviously a big target for Republicans to take on. Wasn't necessarily a big focus of Biden's, but he did through the 80s start to speak out about it, and started talking about, well, we hear these stories about people on welfare riding in limousines and wearing nice fur and all this other kind of stuff. And by the 90s he starts suggesting that people, there should be a limit to how long they can be on welfare, and they should be having to have job seeking requirements and all this kind of thing to make it harder to access welfare for working class people. And so by 1996, one of the ironies is that he had said that he was thinking of retiring a year earlier, I believe. But he told this group of Democrats, but I look at what these Republicans like Gingrich want to do, and this stuff just makes me so mad. They just want to do the bidding of rich people, and they want to destroy the legacy of the Democrats. And when I realized what they were going to do, I knew I couldn't retire to stay in. So Biden runs in 96, wins, and of course during 96, what does he do? He is one of the people. This is a across the board effort, a big grand bipartisan effort. So it's not just Biden, but he puts forward a welfare reform bill. It doesn't pan out, but he's working with other legislators, including his own counterpart in Delaware, to get it move it forward, and eventually it did. Clinton obviously famously signed that welfare reform bill, which really led to the evisceration of welfare in large parts of the country. But also, it's important to note that Biden was actually, documents shows at the time, Biden was actually invited to the signing ceremony for the welfare bill. So this shows you how involved he was and how he was considered important to that effort. The fact that he was actually invited to the signing of the bill.
Okay, let's talk about the bankruptcy bill, because that's something that Biden is known for. That really was his baby, even though he tried to say on stage with Bernie Sanders that it wasn't. I mean, this is just incredulous to me. And again, the mainstream media did not challenge him on this. He supported the banks in the bankruptcy bill, but not the working class. You say it's more than just supporting his local industry, which is Delaware, where they're all headquartered. Talk about his own personal benefit and his benefit to his family members, and whether you think this is corruption. And if so, do you think Trump can use this against him? Or do you think that Trump won't go there because his own corruption is so much worse?
Yeah, so obviously, as you say, this was an element of Biden protecting the corporations that kind of undergirded Delaware's economy. But at the same time, there's a reason that he was called the Santa from MBNA, which, by the way, not just Biden, but other Delaware politicians were called as well, because that credit card company gave a lot of money to people like Biden. I'm not sure the exact total, but MBNA was his single biggest donor over the course of his Senate career. And there were other connections. Biden sold his house to an MBNA executive. He, as he pointed out at the time, well, that was market price, but still, not exactly a good look to be selling your house to an industry executive of an industry that you are supposed to be regulating in theory. His son was hired by MBNA. Later, during the course of Biden kind of shepherding this bill to fruition, his son left MBNA, but they hired him with this retainer fee, so he was a consultant for them. I'm not sure if he did anything, but they were paying him all the same. And of course, he passed that bill in 2005 under a Republican president. I mean, is this corruption? Yeah, I mean, I think it clearly is corruption. Legally, on the letter of the law, probably not, because let's face it, this kind of run-of-the-mill corruption is, well, it's run-of-the-mill. It's accepted. It's factored into the U.S. political system now, which is a very big shame. But of course, it is very scandalous. And Trump is definitely going to make this a big part of this case. He's already hitting Biden on on his son's links to China. Obviously, Trump is immensely corrupt, and much more so than Biden. But the thing is, as we learned from 2016, that doesn't matter, because what Trump is going to do is he's got that loyal following that doesn't really care what he does. They're going to back him no matter what. They'll follow him into the deepest reaches of the ocean until they're all underwater. It doesn't matter. But Trump will try and suppress the enthusiasm of the other person's side. So he's going to. Biden has at the moment, no positive case he's making. He has no big ideas. He's solely really running on, I'm not Trump, and I'm going to restore the country to a time before Trump. And because I'm not a corrupt, racist, rapist like Trump is, that will be good enough. But I suspect that you're going to see Trump and his campaign team start to chip away at that image of the kindly Uncle Joe, the decent, working class champion. And I think you're going to see them pointing out, hey, actually, this guy is not really that much different from Trump. And the people who are going to vote for Trump, they're going to vote for him anyway. But Democrats, as they were in 2016, they might look at these choices and go, well, what's the point? And then just stay home.
Let's talk about Warren, because she said some things back then about the bankruptcy bill. She called it, quote, a quiet attack on women, and charged that Biden had, quote, agreed to vote with Republicans on almost all the issues that were holding up the bill. Then you write, the two would finally meet face-to-face 3 years later at a Judiciary Committee meeting where Biden accused her of making a mildly demagogic argument, quote unquote, and insisted her real problem was with interest rates, not bankruptcy. And then she replies, but if it's not going to fix that problem, you can't take away the last shred of protection for these families, unquote. Warren shot back. I got it, okay? Biden replied, chuckling. You're very good, Professor. And then in 2014, she said, quote, the Senate was evenly split between the two parties, but if one of the bill's lead sponsors was Democratic powerhouse Joe Biden, and right behind him were plenty of other Democrats offering to help. So now this is the Elizabeth Warren who basically does not endorse Bernie's campaign. True, she was the last one of the challengers to endorse him just a few days ago. But do you think that is because she is trying to be his vice president? A lot of polls are saying she's the leading candidate in the two swing states of Michigan and Wisconsin. Do you think she is that craven that she would throw away all her principles just for her own personal career ambition? Or do you think she's always been that way and she just fooled us that she was a progressive?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I think she's definitely trying to be his VP, and I think it's very clear that she's making a mockery of a lot of the things that she said to get where she is, which is really unfortunate. I'm honestly quite baffled by what has happened to her this year. But yeah, I mean, if you watch that endorsement video that she did of him, this is a man who in many ways launched her political career. I mean, bankruptcy was her issue. That was the big thing that actually turned her into a liberal. That's part of her kind of origin story. And this is the guy who, as she says, ripped away the last shreds of protection for a lot of middle class and working class families that required bankruptcy to get, to deal with the mountains of debt that they were snowed under. And that students today are snowed under, and they can't because of Biden's bill. And what was kind of starting to me is when I watched that endorsement video, it ends with this kind of fond reminiscence to when Biden swore Warren in. And he kind of said something along the lines of, "Oh, you really gave me hell, Professor," back in the day. And then they kind of laugh. And she kind of says, this is kind of presented as this positive story that kind of shows how affable he is and everything. But to me, it kind of to call back to that moment, which is really reminding us of the fact that once upon a time, this was the animating issue of Warren's career. And now to kind of turn, and that Biden had been the antagonist here, and to turn that into a kind of positive moment for him is really jarring to me. I think it's very obvious that she is trying to play to be his VP, which, is the most rational thing at this point. Vice President Warren is probably the best that we can hope for if you're someone on the kind of left or progressive side. I obviously, it was hugely disappointed with her actions this year, but given the terrible sort of circumstances that now exist, the terrible choice, her being VP would probably, her or Tammy Baldwin would probably be, among the better choices. But I mean, whether he's going to pick her, I very much doubt it. I know I've seen those polls about, her doing well in those states, but I think Warren brings a lot of baggage electorally. She's not really popular in her own home state. Famously, came third in her own state. She kind of already has the demographic that Biden has sewn up, so it doesn't really bring anything beyond that. Because of some of her actions during the campaign, she's alienated that kind of Sanders wing of people, so you can't even make a case for the unity aspect of it. I mean, the only case is, when you look at the election, she probably more than anyone did the most to assist him in actually winning. Once Super Tuesday happened, that was really it, because he had just unstoppable momentum, and that wouldn't have happened if she hadn't stayed in the race for no reason. So, you could say that he owes her something, but I think he'd probably find her a pain in the ass, to be honest, to be frank, to have her as vice president, because she's not ideologically compatible with him.
Right.
And he's going to want someone like Kamala Harris, who basically shares his exact politics. So, yeah.
His exact politics and his exact demeanor, both ambitious careerist with no ideology. All right, so we don't have time to really talk about the crime bill of '94, but as you said, the crime bill of the mid-'80s was actually more significant in terms of the mass incarceration. But he did get on the floor and talk about super predators, and there's a great contrasting video that's too late now, but about Bernie versus Biden on that bill, in which Bernie's trying to talk about where these people come from and why poverty is so important in understanding crime, and Biden just throwing that out the window and saying, no, it's not, they're predators. And his speech was so vile, it made Hillary's comment about super predators look like a compliment. Talk a little bit about his foreign policy, because he seems to get tired of chairing these committees. He got bored with judiciary, and now he went to foreign relations, and he's chairing the Foreign Relations Committee during Bush. He mostly supported Bush's foreign policy, even though he was against the war in 1975. And this is what he said when he was in the Senate, just elected. I've only been here 2 years, but my little generation, which was the guys you fellows were drafting for the Southeast Asian War, is sick and tired of that war. Or actually, this was behind closed doors he told pro-aid Democrats in 1975. Aware of the stir this had caused, he told the Wilmington Morning News the day after that he wasn't a fan of even keeping U.S. troops in countries like Japan and Korea. He lashed out at Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, who had spearheaded the Cambodian adventure, for being in thrall to outdated foreign policy theories. Declaring himself unalterably opposed to U.S. involvement in Angola, he called on Congress to curb the operation. But then you said, just, the next year, by 76, after bad-mouthing the genocidal Kissinger to his local paper, Biden dubbed him the most brilliant Secretary of State the United States has ever seen, voting to confirm Kissinger, even as he voted against more than a dozen other appointees, without explaining that somebody else would try to continue Kissinger's policies without half the grace, tact, or intelligence. So that was a quick turnaround. Just kind of sum up some of the things that he did before we get to the Iraq War.
Yeah, well, once again, you see the political wins, depending on where they're going, Biden goes with it. I should note, he was actually according to one of his classmates, he was a supporter of the Vietnam War during the 60s. And then when he ran against Boggs, I think he became an anti-Vietnam convert, because he realized it was an issue he could use against Boggs, because Boggs was, had made votes to continue fighting the war and that kind of thing. And through the 70s, there was a very active anti-war movement. There was it's very strong anti-war feeling in general. It was a very different time. I think Biden was kind of playing for that time. And then by the time in the 80s, the shift happens in the other direction, or at least it seems like the shift is happening in the other direction with Reagan's wins. Biden, at the same time as he's saying to Democrats, we can't be the same anymore. We can't, be as liberal in economics and all this stuff. We can't, cater to special interests, as he calls them, meaning Black Americans and poor Americans and Latinos and that kind of thing. He says we also have to get over this cringing at the use of force. We have to be more open to intervention. And so, for example, he's a very gung-ho supporter of the war in the Falklands. He wants Reagan to support the British war there. He supports Reagan's bombing of Libya. He supports Reagan's invasion of Grenada. He supports Bush's invasion of Panama, which that was a really nasty little war. People want to read about that one in their own time. He votes against the Iraq War, so the first Gulf War that Bush embarks on. He actually takes a pretty strong stand against it. But then afterwards, it's such a political success for Bush that Biden actually says, well, you know what, I was wrong. Credit where credit's due, Bush was right. And then for the rest of the 90s, he actually becomes more pro-war than a lot of Republicans. He's pushing Clinton to go into Bosnia and Kosovo, and he's pushing for more action against Iraq to get rid of Saddam. At the same time, the Republicans, who, under Bush, were sort of saying, yes, war, suddenly they're saying, oh, we're not so sure about this. And then obviously that all leads to the Iraq War, which again, he supported because of the electoral realities as he saw them in his state. And basically spent the entire year of 2002 propagandizing for the war, basically repeating Bush's talking points, saying that Saddam had to be removed, backing Bush up when Colin Powell testifies to the UN, saying, that was an airtight case. You could convict someone for a crime based on that. Saying, well, I think Bush has taken the road of moderation. I trust him. Obviously voting for the war. And then once he voted for the war, he then embarked on this world tour where he ended up basically trying to clear the way for the war to be successful in the Middle East. So saying to allies, hey, we're going to go in. Please, do not stop us or get involved in anything. And again, he by the late stage of Bush's term, the second term, he does turn more against the war. But I mean, even then, it's very belated. It's once the winds had already shifted. He was a very late comer to this. And so, I mean, that's sort of the story really of his entire career. People have asked me before, what's going to happen if he's president? I really don't know. I don't know what kind of Joe Biden you're going to be getting. I think there is a real mood among the American public right now to not go to war, to not start pointless wars and to waste money and lives, bombing people in other countries. But whether Biden and the Democrats actually recognize that, that's a whole other question.
My show about Venezuela and Iran with some folks from Code Pink, we talked about how Obama might have an they're all the same. How Trump might have an October surprise, if he's losing very badly because of the pandemic or because of the economy being in a depression, he could very well try to start a war with, Iran or Venezuela to distract. Getting back to your book, I don't want to get into too much of what he did in the Obama presidency as vice president, but you talk about the appointees, that he might have had a role in those conservative centrist appointees. We can't know for sure. There was a stimulus program task force on the middle class. There was a card check bill, which Obama campaigned on. Talk about how Biden let the unions down with that, because you talk about how he could have used his skills, which he used so wonderfully, trying to get Democrats to support Republican bills, why he didn't use them to get Republicans to support this.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the cases for Biden. He can reach across the aisle. He can negotiate. He compromises, all this kind of thing. And it's true that he did get a bunch of bipartisan buy-in to a whole host of bills, early in his career. But the key to note there is his biggest legislative accomplishments have always been right-wing legislation. Have always been kind of Republican goals. The rewriting of the criminal code, the general toughen crime, toughen drug stuff, welfare reform, all that stuff is things that the Republicans are already favoring, and that's why he was able to get buy-in for that. And then, this was one of the cases they made from his vice president. They said, well, he's going to be able to bring this experience, wheeling and dealing, doing all this kind of stuff in the Senate, doing the stuff that you're supposed to do. he'll be able to get us the votes that we need. To his credit, I mean, on some cases, Biden was reportedly important in getting some senators to support the stimulus, for example, although I'm not sure how instrumental his role was in that, really, because I think in that case, the economic system was on the brink of such collapse that there was an inherent kind of need to pass that anyway, that people would have folded anyway. But I mean, beyond that, when it came time to pass card check, for example, Biden not only could he not get Republicans, to come on board, of course, because they were intent on just squashing anything Biden was doing, but he was also not able to get even Democrats, conservative Democrats, to jump on board to some of the stuff, like card check, and a whole host of other stuff. So, some of the bipartisan achievements they did get during this time was negotiating with Mitch McConnell and basically just giving McConnell everything he wanted when he sat opposite him at the table, to the chagrin of many Democrats, even conservative ones like Dianne Feinstein. And ultimately, it's kind of what helped launch Bernie Sanders into the national spotlight. The deal that he made with McConnell in 2010, that was such an outrageous kind of lopsided deal that everyone was pissed off about it.
I want to talk about what you think is going to happen in November. And I want to read a quote from your book where he was talking in 2001. He said, I was one of those guys in 1987 who tried to run on a platform that Clinton basically ran on in 1992. And that is, for lack of a better phrase, his third way. It worked. It's where the American people are. It's where the Democratic Party should be. One of the things I'm most angry about in the aftermath of the 2000 election is we're now renegotiating as a party what the hell our message should be and who we are, when for me it was settled in 92. And then he was speaking about people who thought the party should return to the economically populist routes Roosevelt had charted during the New Deal. And he writes or says, first off, they're wrong substantively. But secondly, it's not the way we win elections. So the idea now, and it's credible, is that class warfare and populism is the way we should conduct the next election. We do that, and George Bush will be a second-term president, regardless of how bad a job he may do. Now, that he said in 2001, and obviously Clinton, who felt the same way, did not run on the class war and populism, that everybody now agrees that if Bernie Sanders were the nominee and he won on that, he would have run. So do you think Sanders should have stayed in the race since he was, again, running on this? And how do you think fears of Trump, concerns about electability, and the virus played into Biden's victories? And do you think Sanders should have dropped out when he did, just as the coronavirus was proving the need for all his programs?
Well, in the end, we had a few weeks of the coronavirus, and I had actually thought that maybe it would change something, because obviously there's, we're on the road to a very, very monumentally terrible depression. People are losing their health insurance, all this kind of thing. But the fact is, the ruthlessness of the Democratic Party in terms of just trying to get Sanders out of the race meant that people were being put in harm's way. I mean, and I think from what the reports have said, so the reporting about Sanders eventually, deciding to bow out, it was, the Biden campaign apparently had made it clear to him that they were going to keep pushing for that date for Wisconsin. They weren't going to try and push, and we saw that in public statements that Biden had made. They weren't going to try and push it further back and wait for a time when they could do mail-in voting. They were going to insist on these in-person on this in-person voting. And, we've already seen how people got sick in Florida, in Illinois. I'm sure there's going to be a spate of cases that are coming out of that. So, the longer he stayed in the race, and also given that there weren't really, nothing was changing. I mean, Biden was still winning no matter what. It just would have meant staying in and sacrificing people's lives. So I can't really fault him for that. Whether he should have endorsed him so quickly, I think that's one of the big questions. I honestly, I don't really know what his plan is. Perhaps his thinking is, if I get behind him now, I won't be, tarred and feathered as kind of, I stayed in too late. And maybe his plan is to get Biden in there and then to continue his movement and try and pressure Biden once he's already in the White House? I really have no idea. I see you shaking your head.
No,
I don't
you
know.
see, I hate to disagree with you because you're my guest, but
It's nothing to disagree with. I have no idea. I'm just saying
I
this
disagree with you about Wisconsin because it was not the
Right.
Democratic Party. I know Ben Wickler. He's the head of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. They were trying valiantly to stop that in-person voting. So was the Democratic governor.
They were,
It was
but the governor.
Republican speaker. It was the Republican leader of the legislature, Voss, who wanted that Supreme Court justice reelected. That's why that happened.
Yeah, but the governor dragged his feet on even making this an issue. I think he waited the weekend or just before the weekend before voting. And secondly, I mean, regardless of what you want to say, the Republican Party did it. I mean, the Biden campaign was asked about this. Biden said just before the voting, he said, yeah, I mean, look, it's perfectly going to be safe. We can just have people at 6 feet distances, and we had voting during the previous pandemic, and we've had voting during the Civil War, so this should be fine too. And then after voting had already happened, it was a colossal disaster that we saw. Biden then said, well, my gut instinct is it should never have happened. So no, I mean, I agree with you. That was mostly the Republicans, but the Democrats, I think, very belatedly came to the conclusion that they had to try and delay it. And the Biden campaign very clearly did not want to do anything to pressure any action beforehand, just as they hadn't in Illinois, I mean, and Florida and Arizona. Biden was saying, and the Democratic Party officials in Illinois were saying right up until the date that, yeah, it's totally safe. It's totally fine to go out and vote.
Okay, we're going to have to end it here. I want to just read the last paragraph of your book because I think it's great. You say Democratic primary voters improbably hold the future of not just the country, but potentially modern civilization in their hands. By July 2020, we will know if they learn from history. Now, actually, it was April 2020 because the coronavirus and what Bernie did. But I don't think they will learn from history because they barely teach history in schools anymore. And people are very affected by what they read in the mainstream media. And also they vote on rhetoric and platitudes more than actually record or policies. Do you think, final question, Bill Clinton famously said it's the economy, stupid. As I said before, we're probably going to be in a Great Depression. They're predicting 25 to 30% unemployment. I think that if he tries to open up the country too soon, we're going to have increase of cases and deaths. I don't think things are going to be looking good for Trump in November. And I think Biden can just win by default, which I think would be horrible because the man, forgetting about his records and his centrism and being yesterday's man, not really having a policy plan to meet this moment that we're in, not just the coronavirus, but also catastrophic climate change, which is an existential threat. God knows how he's going to govern or what kind of Manchurian candidate he's going to be. If he has to read everything right now from a teleprompter, who knows what forces are going to control him. So do you think that he will win because of these factors I mentioned? And if he wins, do you think that he could be as bad or if not worse than Trump because the people behind him will be more intelligent and evil bad actors?
I mean, anything can happen between now. Obviously, this and the election. Obviously, this book was written before the coronavirus crisis. I mean, I would have said before then that Biden was a very likely loser. He's a very weak candidate. Even now, we're seeing his very low enthusiasm. Trump is beating him in terms of just his media visibility. And this is before his polling is actually worse than Clinton's was in 2016, and that's after Clinton had already gone and was going through a pretty rough media gauntlet. A lot of scrutiny that Biden has not been treated to, on some of those corruption issues and some of the stuff around his family, and obviously the sexual assault allegation. Now, there's so many variables depending on what Trump decides to do, depending on if he bungles this thing. The other thing that I have been thinking, and I can see this very much happening, if Biden is looking like he's going to win, I would not put it past Trump to cynically and probably dishonestly try and outflank Biden on the left and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to, in order to win, I'm going to say, yes, let's expand Medicare for all. Let's, have a really bold responses crisis, a UBI, whatever. I don't know what he's going to do, but I wouldn't put it past him. And to basically present himself as someone, I might have screwed this up before, or China screwed it up, as he's going to say, but I'm at least presenting the kind of bold leadership we're showing. If Biden does win, it totally depends on who's going to staff his administration, which is a much more important question than which policies is he going to adopt? Because that's, Biden's commitments, his verbal commitments are meaningless. He says anything anyway. You really have to focus on who's going to be staffing this administration. I think probably in foreign policy, it's going to be more of the same. But people will probably be looking to make sure that some of his, economic advisors are not those kind of Clintonite neoliberals that had staffed up Obama's administration. And as you say, he's a guy who's reading off a piece of paper live on TV. So those people will have really very, very powerful influence on the direction of that administration under a Biden presidency. But, we'll have to see. We just don't know yet. The last thing is that just so far, Biden does not really seem to be making any sort of play to move left, despite the best hopes of people. So, it doesn't look great, but we'll find out.
Yes. Well, we're going to have to leave it here. I've been talking to Branko Marcetic, who is the author of Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden, published by Jacobin Press. Where else can they buy this book besides Amazon, which I'm boycotting and urging everybody to boycott?
You can get off the Jacobin website if you just Google Yesterday's Man and jacobinmag.com. You can also get it off the Verso Books website, and I believe you also get a free ebook, or maybe that's a Jacobin one.
Thank you, Branko, for being my guest. I hope to have you on again, because I'm sure you're going to write something else that's wonderful that I'm going to want to share with my viewers. So to everybody, stay safe, stay home, and keep fighting.